I do like blood sausage, but it made me uncomfortable when you said it.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Irenicast. I'm your host, Jeff, and with me, as always, are my co-hosts, Mona and Alan. We are post-evangelical ministers and theological thinkers grappling with our place in the progressive Christian world. Thank you for joining us for another conversation on faith and culture. This week, we are going to talk about prophecy, I guess more accurately, the prophetic. And for our segment, we are going to be bringing back Title Me This. So when we talk about the prophetic, we're talking about, I think, number one is anytime someone mentions prophecy, I think that the misnomer is that it is future telling, right?
Yes and no.
Wait, what else could it be? If it's not about the future.
No.
I'm giving you a prophecy about what already happened. Ooh, there will be a great war.
I guess that's a good place to start, kind of defining what we see prophecy being, or the function of prophecy. I used to think the prophecy was just future telling, but after studying like prophetic books in the Hebrew Bible, the function of the prophet in Israel, and then looking at the New Testament with some of those lenses, like prophecy is, people call it speaking truth to power, or Walter Brueggemann, I think in his book Prophetic Imagination, talks about it being the vocation of the prophet, keeping alive the imagination, the ministry of imagination, and proposing alternative futures to the one that the king proposes. So officially, prophecy was critiquing the status quo. It's like a challenge to the status quo with a different vision of the future in mind. So it's not necessarily this is going to happen in the future, but a critique of the world that is presented by the kingdom or whatever. So there's different ways to look at it. It doesn't have to be magic-y. It could be functional, you know?
Well, it's no more magic than astute social commentator that has seen history play itself out over and over again and can say, like, this is pretty likely to happen if we don't shift direction and do this.
Maybe. I think I'd probably disagree.
Well, I'm sure you'll put you'll put God in there or something like that. But yeah, whatever.
Yeah, yeah. I think the primary role of prophecy is like the articulation of another world, like the dreaming of another world. So when you hear people like Martin Luther King Jr. saying, "I have a dream," he's actually speaking prophecy that is in line with the Spirit of God. Like his dream at the time contradicted the present world, the laws, the communities, even the people who use the Bible against what he was speaking of. He dreamed of this other world that had the beloved community filled with people that crossed racial boundaries. And so like that right there, I would call prophecy. Yes, it's talking about the future. It's moving toward justice. But I believe that it is like the activity of the Spirit of God in conjunction with, like Jeff is saying, human commentary on culture and ethics or whatever.
But that's a progressive view of prophecy. There's also a fundamentalist. Sure. There's like two major streams of prophecy that would, and I love what you've laid out. I think that's wonderful. And that's one way to look at it. But
I say that's the primary rule. I do think that there is a secondary rule, which is probably what you're going to talk about right now. Right.
Wouldn't you say that most people who hold that more progressive, like alternate view of the future, biblical criticism sort of look, tend to be progressive and not really believe in the magic elements of future telling or fortune telling?
Kind of. Yes and no. I think that there's options along that spectrum. It's not like
Alan does. Alan believes in it.
I fit right in the middle.
But
okay?
It tends to be pretty polarizing, though.
Sure. I think that the primary role of the prophetic is what I kind of just laid out. But for me, the secondary role, because I'm Trinitarian and because I believe God is articulating in history that, there is this moment when God will dwell with humanity, and that comes in the person of Jesus. And so like that kind of future telling in that sense is a lot like like you're saying, the fundamentalist perspective on prophecy is that God was saying to the Israelite people, there will come a day when God dwells with you, and like look for it and hope for it. And I believe that happened in Christ. So although my primary role in interpreting prophecy is one of challenging the status quo, the Spirit being active in a person to like dream up of another world, I also believe that there is sometimes this secondary role of, hey, this is what God's future is. This is what the Spirit has promised to do in history. And so it's kind of a both and thing for me. But I get really uncomfortable because sometimes it's super abused. And I mean,
you're telling me. I grew up Pentecostal. Basically, prophecy is the foundation of all apologetics, right? Like, here are all the Old Testament prophecies about Jesus, and here's how they came through, and all that kind of stuff. And I think that the problem when we associate, for me at least, in the stuff that I've read, because I've read Brueggemann's Prophetic Imagination, and I recently read a really great book by, what was her name? Ellen Davis, called Biblical Prophecy. And she lays out this really good foundation for, I think, a good way to view prophecy. But one of the things she says in the beginning is that the message of the prophet is very concrete and super hyper relevant to its own context. It's not about future telling. It's about creating what you were saying, Alan, that idea of like this ideal future, but really expecting things to change for the here and the now and the better. And I guess that's the here and now aspect of kingdom and prophecy and all that stuff. But
I'm going to argue that that's a very different mode than what I'll call a fundamentalist sense of prophecy, which is not, it doesn't have anything to do with we can dream of a different future. It's that there is a cosmic future that's inevitable and we have to accept it and prepare for it. And it's not an imaginative process. It's like the opposite.
Yeah.
Sort of. I think those things go together though. I believe
they could,
particularly in the New Testament. I think it's worth saying in the Hebrew Bible, Jeff, you said that sometimes Christians, point to Old Testament, quote unquote, passages that talk about Jesus or prophecy that was fulfilled by this historical event or that one. And sometimes a more critical understanding of those books and texts, you realize that this text, like Isaiah, for instance, is an amalgamation of a lot of different texts written over different periods of time. So it's not like you can just take it as at face value and say, oh, this is the prophet speaking before it happened, so therefore the Bible's true, right? Like that's a very simplistic way of reading that. But I think particularly in the New Testament, when it talks about prophecy, like in Revelation or some of the more apocalyptic parts of like Thessalonians, it's addressing the status quo that itself was cosmic, right? You look at the way the Roman Empire envisioned itself, and the emperor is this like son of God and mediates God's relationship with the world, and it's all encompassing of the whole divine cosmos. And so when the prophet in the New Testament stands to critique that in the Spirit of God, it's like that critique has to be cosmic. You know what I mean? It has to reach the level that it is critiquing. So I think so sometimes we like read that and we read it into different contexts and we forget like, well, what are they even critiquing? You know what I mean? What is this prophecy doing? So there's an important element of realizing that, I don't know who did you say said that, Jeff, that it's hyper relevant for the context that it's in. I really like that.
It was from, I don't think that was the exact wording, but that was from Ellen Davis's Biblical Prophecy book.
Okay. Well, that's cool. Yeah.
You guys, it's so funny. Yesterday in the mail, I received this pamphlet. It's almost like they knew we were going to record this conversation. Like someone had a revelation. I got this pamphlet in the mail for like an upcoming prophetic thing, and it's got like a nice big picture. Like it's a really professional. It almost looks like a business brochure. A nice big picture of the city I live in and everything. And it's like, find answers to all your questions. A new day is dawning. Can God be trusted? Seeing the signs. And why is there so much pain and suffering in the world? Continuing topics include experiencing peace, the United States in prophecy, making sense of the mark of the beast, and the return of Jesus, fact or fiction. So it's like advertising to people to come to this thing and like get all their answers filled and like learn about prophecy. And I don't know, I love everything you guys have said. And I'm having to check this immense like tide of anger that's like welling up for me because I feel like this has been so harmful for so many people.
Yes.
But prophecy is it's not limited to only Christianity. Fundamentalist prophecy is like, it's really important right now in jihadist ISIS kind of style Islam, where they're interpreting these really old texts in ways that they think is for today and taking extreme action. And I don't see how, going to Syria to help fight is different than like selling all your belongings and waiting for the return of Jesus. It's like, it's got this, to me, it's got the same kernel. I mean, maybe that's offensive to some people. It's got the same kernel of ideology within it. It's like this uncritical belief in a magical future telling. So I don't know. I'm having a hard time talking about this, to be honest.
It's funny because I'm still there though. Like it would be nice to say, hey, that's just fundamentalist, but that's also partially me. I still read like the history of God and the future of God into the way I live in the here and now. I'm not selling all my belongings and, believe Jesus is coming back right now and all those things. I think that's a misappropriation of texts that are ancient and trying to force them to be relevant in this, present day and age. And that always bothers me, right? The United States and Revelation, or like, let's grab the newspaper and look at the headlines and see if there's signs of the times of Jesus coming back and the tribulation. And that gets poisonous, not just for ISIS, but for Christians too.
No, I'm saying like, yeah, this is right, like a global phenomenon. That is what you're saying.
Mm-hmm. But specifically, I have to say, the reason it bothers me so much is I have heard from the lips of ministers that peace in the Middle East is a bad thing because it signals the coming of the Antichrist. So however they like construct their vision of the future based on these prophecies and however they interpret Revelation has led them to actually oppose peace, which is crazy to me. It's the opposite of prophecy.
To try to like rebuild the second temple because they think that will hurry Jesus coming back. There are Christian Zionistic groups doing that kind of stuff too. So,
and they want to kick Palestinians out of their homes and restore Israel and do terribly, horribly unjust stuff. So you're right. It is a problem.
And that's why I think it's important for us to talk about this, because I think maybe the word prophecy or prophet or whatever gives us that impression more, especially for me, and because I grew up in Pentecostalism. So the word prophetic or prophecy were thrown around a lot. But I really like the way, if you ever listen to Cornel West's speeches or read some of his writings, he uses the word like prophetic movement in connection with Martin Luther King Jr.'s civil rights. And I think that when I hear the prophetic now, I think slowly over time, because I've maybe indoctrinated myself with another side of it, but that's what it feels like to me. It's that idea of justice. It's that idea of peacemaking. It's that aggressive peacemaking that Jesus talks about in the Sermon on the Mount, and that it's informed peacemaking. It's not something that is, I'm just reacting to the situation. There's an intelligence behind it. There's a meaning and a purpose behind the events that are happening. It wasn't just Martin Luther King saying, let's try this gimmick of nonviolence. It was part of bringing out that message. It reminds me of when the prophets of the Hebrew scriptures, they did all these random things, especially Ezekiel, to kind of highlight and bring to attention what is happening there. It's aggressive and it's counterculture, because I think that typically if we're talking about that prophetic movement existing here today, it is always existing from someone that almost can't have ties to any kind of institution because it will automatically put barriers on their message. They may crash through those barriers, but if someone is like a pastor can't necessarily act in the sense of a prophet because they have other things to worry about. You know what I mean? Like money and people coming in. So it's this counterculture, intelligent movement towards justice. And I think that that's an important aspect of at least people coming from perhaps a more conservative background or no background in Christianity tend to hear more prophecy in the context of the end of the world. Hornets are like helicopters and all that stuff.
That's really interesting. After hearing you say that, I think what bothers me so much about prophecy being let's interpret the sign of the times with Revelation is that it's not intelligent about the times, right? It's not intelligent about what's here and now. It's like a very cheap appeal to like false equivalencies and stuff like that. What you're talking about is the prophet understands the way the world is right now, understands it really well, and can critique it in a way that speaks that understanding.
Yeah. And more importantly, doesn't understand the times, but understands the people that are most marginalized by the times.
Yeah, exactly. And so when I hear Mona being invited to an end times prophecy conference, it's like, that is the definition of disconnected from the injustice in the world. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, oh, is the United States going to play this role in it? Well, let's actually talk about the United States in a prophetic way. Let's look at the injustice that has been propped up by the machine, and the prophetic will critique that stuff, right? In the name of a new world. So I think that's got to be what it is.
Well, it seems like to me that when people who don't have a lot of biblical criticism training read prophetic books, they read these books as a preference for a chosen people, and they appropriate that into Christianity. So I think a lot of times it turns into maybe conversations about injustice, but it's like injustice for Christians. It's like Christians' voices being suppressed and martyrdom and persecution. And it's not a holistic look at justice and building a better world for everybody. It's a hyper focus on Christians and losing ground, or trying to make the church basically be a microcosm of the whole world and make the church in power and things like that. So
because it's interpreted through a worldview, I don't like that word. I think we've said that before, but it's interpreted through this like cosmic war that's happening between the world and the church, right? And there's texts taken from the book of Revelation, which are talking about the Roman Empire and critiquing the Roman Empire, and applied to like the entire world is against the church, and the church has to battle against them, and this is going to wage on. That should sound familiar, because that sounds like ISIS almost, right? Like that's the exact sort of language and rhetoric that's used in their telling of the future of the world. Not that Christians are, doing the same thing or whatever, but it's interesting that it does make sense.
It's a trademark of fundamentalism. You come from that, right? It's a trademark of fundamentalism to reify ideologies that bring people together and unite against a common enemy. That's like a trademark, right? Yeah. Like it's us versus the world, or us versus them, and that makes the community incredibly close knit and powerful.
But it's also super cheap, especially in like the era that we're in is just barely post American Christendom. You rewind the clock like 50 years and we're like the seat of power in American social life. And so to hear people who had power once losing power, like lamenting the fact that we don't have as much as we did before, like that's not the voice of prophecy, right? That's the voice of like a kid having their candy taken away. I don't know. But for me, prophecy is best when you look at instances like the book of Isaiah, right? Isaiah chapter 22. And in Chronicles, Hezekiah building the wall around Jerusalem is praised. That's awesome. He's protecting the promised land. The king is establishing the world as it should be. This is the status quo that needs to be protected. And in Isaiah chapter 22, that's actually criticized. Like the king is criticized for destroying the homes that were connected to the wall. And I've been to Israel and I stood at the base of that exact wall that's been excavated and thought about like, what is the prophetic, right? What is the role of the prophet? The role of the chronicler of the official church history is to like praise the king's established reign, and the role of the prophet is to critique it. And I see that in the church right now. Like there are people who are chronicling church history or chronicling like the role of the church in the world and trying to protect its ground. And then there are the prophetic voices, which are like, actually, we need to totally relook at how we've done church. And so prophecy for me is actually a really powerful thing when it's not equated with the cheap stuff that we hear and we've come from.
What makes it cheap for you, though?
What makes it cheap for me is the Left Behind series that was on like number 1 and number 4 on the New York Times bestseller list. The sensationalism.
Yeah, okay, but let me counter argue for a second, because there are so many people who earnestly believe that the rapture is coming, so for them it doesn't feel sensational. Like for them it's like very realistic, even though it's like, in my opinion, like bad literature and it's like horrible use of biblical text, but for a lot of people that stuff is very real and possible, which is terrifying.
I think it goes deeper than that. I think really the misappropriation of it's not necessarily the extreme, easy to spot weird philosophy about what Revelation means and applying all these things to modern contexts in really strange ways. But it's more about a misunderstanding of what justice is and a misunderstanding of how much hard work it is. The thing that I think of right now I'm on staff at a United Methodist Church, and the United Methodist Church is going through a lot, specifically centering around the LGBTQ community. And towards the beginning of our podcast, we interviewed 2 of our congregants, Jim and Richard, a gay couple who have been going through the struggle over and over again within the UMC about inclusiveness and allowing people to, and it's kind of coming to a climax, that difficult fight. And you have people who are progressive who would line with what we kind of talk about on this show as this is what's important. But in order to maintain unity, in order to maintain the system, we really need to just wait and let God move. And the minute that we are in the systems that the prophets are challenging, then we water down our sense of justice instead of saying, no, like this structure, this organization, whatever it is not as important as the people who are being hurt by it. And I think that it takes someone who's separated from it to a certain extent, but also intimately connected with the people that are being oppressed to really step out and be the prophet, move in the prophetic and say, no, it doesn't matter what is important for the structure. It matters what's important for justice and for people.
And you can look at that outside of the church. So the prophets who are critiquing the present world, the world system that I love, are the ones who are seeing the way that it has hurt neo-capitalism and all sorts of things, corporate greed that is destroying lives in other parts of the world. The spirit of the prophetic, the spirit of God, I do believe actually does continue to speak through people who function as prophets when they call that out.
And I think that it's an important aspect of that is them being on the outside at a certain level, because money, power, all that stuff affects the message. And if you look at people that we would consider prophets in our modern context, a lot of them aren't associated with a church or a denomination because I think they recognize the difficulty of that. And we have to have that. It's almost this cosmic checks and balances. We have to have people outside of the systems. And I wonder if checks and balances within any system is possible.
No, I think that's congruent actually with a biblical understanding of prophecy. Prophets were almost never priests.
Exactly.
So there's a lineage in biblical writings of kind of these two arms that check and balance each other. There's the priestly, the people that maintain the ritual aspects of the religion, and then there's the prophets who are constantly testing and making sure that the priestly are doing their job. So the priestly are like carrying out the day-to-day things, and the prophets have to be outside, like you said, outside that
flipping
system.
tables.
Which is why it's so revolutionary that Jesus was referred to as the prophet, priest, and king, because before that, those things weren't in one.
Right. And so I think in addition to it being so hard to do actually the work of the prophet, so we settle for easier ways of, who was it? Bernard of Clairvaux, I think, one voice in church history, medieval history, said, if you want to embrace, this off the top of my head, if you want to embrace the work of the prophet, you don't need a scepter. What you need is a hoe, a garden hoe. You have to do like the hard work, not the easy one. So I agree, Jeff, that a lot of times we resort to cheap forms of understanding prophecy in American culture because real justice and real prophetic work is honestly too hard and it's too divisive, right? It threatens the establishments that we have, that we cherish in church. But on the other side of things, I also think that end times prophecy in particular is like a reaction to modernism. It's going back to pre-modernism, to ancient ways of thinking, shrinking back from a world that has like largely lost God. If you look at the rise of the rapture and end times theology and all that stuff, it happened during modernism when God like had less and less space in the world in terms of science and society. And when churches latch on to some of these ancient texts and demand that they be applicable to our present world in like equivalent ways, one for one, there is no like critical work being done. This is the United States that's being talked about in Revelation. What it is it's an appeal to a pre-modern thought where God is active in the world. And so for me, I read Left Behind series because I got excited. This is personal. I got excited that God could be proven in the world. Like if I woke up one day and I saw the mark of the Spirit on people's foreheads, like I would know God's real. Or if we could point to something and say that's the mark of the beast, it'd be like, oh, hey, all this is actually real. The Bible's real. God's real, because we have proof in front of us in the real world. And so it's this uneasiness with the modernism. And so that's why I think it's cheap, is it's not doing the hard work of like, hey, why does it look like God's not present here.
So for you, the left behind was the equivalent of there are no more cookies on the plate when you wake up on Christmas morning.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I guess so. That was part of it. But it was like a bolster for my faith, you know?
Oh, sure. Like reinforced everything you've been taught to think and believe in. But I want to go back to something for a sec. You said earlier that you thought that prophecy that's very like personalized and like Christian centric and stuff like that is cheap because it doesn't want to do the hard work of social justice. I honestly don't think that it's a cop out for a lot of people. I honestly think that people have been taught to spiritualize that stuff and think that when the kingdom of God, seriously, this is the belief that when the kingdom of God comes and Jesus actually reigns and returns, like there, like all these social issues that we have now, like social, you know, racism, poverty, all that stuff, like that will be wiped out. So they're not even going to bother with that stuff. They're just going to pray more because Jesus will fix it. Like, honestly, that's the belief. So
I do believe God will. So I just have to throw this in there. I do believe there is a future. I do believe there's a resurrection. I do believe Jesus will be with us present and that the things we face will no longer be, and all will be well, as Teresa of Avila says. But for me, that doesn't necessarily have to happen next week. It could be billions of years in the future after the heat death of the universe and God recreates everything. You know what I mean? And that makes a really big difference. I think that the prophetic in the present is not saying, let's all just pray because Jesus is coming back and that's the only thing that really necessarily matters. I think the prophetic, you're right. I would disagree with people who interpret it that way because the prophetic for me is connecting to an injustice and calling out injustice. But you're right. That's a different way of interpreting it.
So it seems like the prophetic will be determined by how you've been taught to anticipate the end.
Yes, I think so. Because if it's coming tomorrow, it's not worth fixing the structures that are hurting people, right? It's not worth criticizing.
I think, again, this is a different way of thinking now that if you have a social justice consciousness, but it's not about fixing the structures that hurt people, because if Jesus can heal people, then you don't fix the structures, you pray for them. Like, it's a completely different way of thinking.
I don't think that, I think that even bringing in the end with prophecy or the prophetic is a misinterpretation of it. Like, I don't think it should be about that. I don't think it should ever be about that, only in the sense that we, as people who believe in God or the gospel or Jesus Christ's message, is that we believe maybe one day that there's going to be some perfect reality, whatever that looks like in the end, that's fine. But it's more about how do we live right now as though that's true now. Like I have a problem with it even being associated with the future, because it can too easily go down that road of, oh, well, we can worry about this later, or it'll happen one day. And for people that are hurting and for people that are suffering, that's not hope. That's you're discounting where they're at.
It is. For some people it is. I've worked as a pastor with people who are in lots of pain, and for them that's like
I'm not talking about people who are in pain. I'm talking about groups of people who are systematically oppressed on a regular basis.
I think the prophet willingly enters into pain to critique the things that cause it, because there's this belief that there is a future where that action matters.
And I think they enter into pain purely for connection with those that are oppressed and empathy.
That's humanism.
That strengthens.
Which I think is awesome. But Kurt Vonnegut would say, like, humanism is doing good without hope of a reward, right? And like, I think that that's fantastic. But the prophetic connects with something a little bit different. At least how I read it is the prophetic is like the activity in the present of the Spirit of God in the present that is connected to this greater reality, this cosmic reality, that God is beyond the present. So it's like the real story, right?
But see,
the real story of history is headed toward justice. And so like,
that's what people call the kingdom of God.
But I agree with you. I agree with you when you say that God is present in this cosmic whatever. I just don't like the fact that we assign time to it, because then that makes it feels like God and all those things are separate. But I don't believe that. I believe they're here. They're in our reality just as much as those bad things are. And the more times we use words like future and far off and cosmic, I think the less connected we feel that that's actually a reality, when I believe it is.
So even the push to talk about like the kingdom and prophecy and stuff with the terms of now and not yet, like the tension of now and not yet at the same time. Does that bother you too? Do you think that like
it's less and less of a tension for me?
So prophecy then for you, Jeff, would be like the equivalent of like hard speech, like things that are hard to say but true and right to say, versus looking toward something distantly far off in the future.
Exactly.
But it sounds like, Alan, that's something that works for you, because the kingdom of God is like a coming eschatological
Right.
cosmic reality is something that resonates with
God.
you.
Yeah, and that's God, is that God is the cosmic reality that we are headed toward. And I don't think like God's pulling history. I think I've gone through a lot of personal changes, but it still matters to me to be able to stand up on a Sunday morning and say like, and I do believe this, I believe that every act of goodness or righteousness or mercy or justice is not lost. It's not lost in history. It's actually like, it still persists in the mind of God, and there is a future that it belongs to. You know what I mean? It's not
but
on
don't
its
you think
own.
that on a certain level that makes it feel like it matters now, kind of, but it's really going to matter later? Like that's that problem, like that idea of like we're pulling towards something. I think that sometimes can take the wind out of our sails as far as the work
Except
and the
when
change
you're
we're doing now.
Except when you're critiquing like the injustices of other people, because that cuts through all of the explanations that oppressors have for oppressing, right? They have all these justifications, but if you can point to a different world that is real, that is created by the Spirit of God, and that we're headed toward, then those actions do have consequences, not just in the, you know what I mean? Like I see what you're saying, but there's also this, there's this element that there is more than just the present. You know what I mean? There is the future.
Religion has to be able to address the long-term trajectory of certain
Yes.
actions and chains of events and structures of power.
So you can
Or,
say
like,
it
what
that
good
way.
is it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think the people who are the most prescient prophets of our time are climate scientists who are like beating this drum and saying, you guys, we have to change or everything is going to die. And including, and in 50 years, we're all going to be like, why didn't we listen to those guys? We took them outside the city and tried to stone them, it's so prophecy, I think, does not look like the, Ezekiel making the bread out of turds or whatever. The Bible's got some weird stuff, some really weird stuff.
And maybe it does. Maybe there's some climate scientists who are doing that to, in a metaphorical way, to address the horrible injustice toward the planet and the environment that we're doing right now. So maybe there's creative ways of responding. But what you're pointing to is like, we keep reading these ancient texts with the idea that prophecy is going to come to us in that way. And the definition of prophecy is that it is different and surprising, right? And understands its context.
And connected to context, which is connected to where you're at. And we're not there anymore. So what it's going to look like has to look something familiar to us.
So
I have to second the environment thing, by the way. I think that's spot on.
I agree with that. I think that's a really good example of modern day prophetic.
So if we want to access the prophetic today, it seems like people should stop reading the Bible.
No,
sort
I don't
of.
think that.
but kind of.
I think that's a foundation. I think that is an important foundation if you're going to do Christian prophetic tradition or the Hebrew prophetic tradition. You're standing in a tradition that has history, and so you're actually like relying upon those things to justify what you're doing. And that's what happens. You have these little cults that pop up that reinterpret things so out of context that they lose touch with what the prophetic really is, right? And so I think that the Spirit of God doesn't just work in my mind on its own, which maybe it does, right? But the Spirit of God, in my opinion, works also through history and through what we've received. So it's not this like completely disconnected thing. It's important to understand the prophetic tradition if we're going to do it right.
Yeah, I think the opposite is true. I think it's more of a greater understanding on what the Bible means by prophecy.
Yeah.
It's an expanded understanding that, like, the story of the church is still being written.
Yes.
But you're talking about moving beyond the context of the Bible and actually getting to know our own context in like a really deep way, right?
No,
like
I meant actually stop looking at 2,000, 3,000 years ago. I mean, understand that stuff. Sure, it's absolutely foundational. It's very good to know that history, but like that stuff's not not the stuff we need to be aware of in this time. Like it's what people are discovering now, what science is telling us, what theology and social issues are telling us, what political science is telling us. We have so much information at our disposal nowadays that we don't need to be reading these archaic texts for answers. Like we have answers available to us.
I think we need to read them for a posture. And I think that we have to
that's a
know
good way
our
to put it.
we
Yeah.
have to know our context to actually do the work of prophets.
Yeah.
Because prophets don't speak into the wind; they speak to particular situations, like the ones that we're in.
Yeah, and
Well
you know,
said.
I like some of my favorite ancient writings is like the Book of Amos. It's got incredible ideas about justice
I
and
just preached on that.
and
Oh, so
economic
good.
justice in particular. Really good stuff. Really good stuff. So it's great to know
Amos
that,
6.
and
Sorry.
certainly a lot of
You can't just
modern-
drop a passage of the Bible and move on without me getting really excited about it. I'm
I
sorry,
know.
Mona.
Well,
I'm
but
so
a lot.
stoked.
I know you're so excited. Well, a lot of current prophets who talk about this stuff will reach back and mine that for gems and ideas and thoughts. But really, yeah. So let me ask you this: Does prophecy always have a negative connotation? Is it always a doomsday thing? Is there other types?
I said in my sermon on Amos 6 that, and this is how I read it, that prophecy's main function is challenge. And so it does have this like negative biting edge, but that there are occasions where prophecy does comfort. It just doesn't comfort the status quo.
It comforts,
That's all.
it doesn't comfort the status quo. It's absolutely not
Yeah.
doomsday for those that are victims of whatever is being challenged. And I think that if there's no, like you said, Alan, if there's no challenge, then there's no need for prophecy because we're in heaven or whatever we want to call what the end is going to look like. But no, I think it always has to be challenging and convicting and stirring something, whether it's hope for those that are oppressed, like finally someone saying something, or terror and anger for those that are in power and that are upset by that challenge. The only reason we challenge is because there's hope. There's the whole idea. Like I think hope is the thread that pulls prophecy together. Like that's the point of it.
Yeah, it
But
seems
but
like,
don't talk about the future, Jeff.
no, well, it seems like the comfort also can be not just comfort, but it has to me, in reading biblical prophecy and hearing prophets today, like Martin Luther King, the imaginative aspect is not just like, hey, we could have a better reality, but it's like, no, it's going to happen. I'm going to speak it into existence.
Right.
I'm going to proclaim it from the
Yes.
rooftops until it becomes real. So there's actually like not just an imaginative, but the creative creation aspect of like bringing that new order that is God's will and God's heart into existence, like with like force, like peaceful force, but like with force, with power, with like, no, we are not going to handle that. We're not going to accept this old thing anymore. We're going to bring this new thing in and we're going to say it until it becomes true.
The hinge for all of that for me, which may be different for you guys, is that it is both simultaneously divine and human. It comes to us from God. Like that is what the prophetic is built on. And it's 100% human. If you look at prophecy or the role of the prophet or the spirit working through people, it's 100% human. I think it can be flawed or whatever. But that it doesn't just arise from us. Like this prophecy we're talking about is different than the sort of like utopian thing that we can just imagine and kind of create on our own. This is partnership and participation in the life of God for this planet. You know what I mean? And the reason I say that is God, I didn't really want to talk about personal experience, but I guess I need to. I had a dream when I was younger, and this is totally weird.
I
In
was
my
hoping
dream-
you would tell this story.
Well, maybe not this story. This is probably a different one. But I had a dream of a field, and it was a field with like super tall wheat. And I was walking down this path, and I was like looking at all of it, and it was like this super crazy mystical experience where like I didn't even have the theological terms for it because I think I might have been in like 9th grade or something. But I had this impression of like, this is what the future is for us. And like, it was something that was so powerfully moving for me that it like affected my daily living in the here and now. And for me, that's like what the vision of God's future does in prophecy is that it inspires those who needs to be inspired. It inspires fear in people who are betting on the crappy version of the world that they think will always exist, right? Like, so it's hard for me to talk about this without my personal experience. And the stuff you're referencing is something a little bit different, and we could talk about that too. But
Will you please tell that story? Please?
which one? There's a lot of, honestly, I don't share stuff with kind of anyone in my congregation and stuff, but I've kept a journal for a lot of years, and I've had some pretty crazy personal experiences that have shaped my views of theology. So
the story, Alan, that I'm thinking of, it goes to the heart of this question of, is prophecy about the future and can we know the future?
right.
That what happened with the crash when you were a kid.
Yeah. So, and it's happened other times in my life. But it started, I guess, I was like talking to my parents, and I had night terrors growing up, which is another story. And those kind of night terrors, you wake up and you start screaming and stuff, but they can't really wake you up, and they keep trying to. Parents, if you're listening to this, you might have that with your kids. It's a terrible thing. And one of them was, I woke up in the middle of the night, and my parents were trying to comfort me, and I must have been 4 years old. They heard me saying over and over, car accident, I can't get out. I'm still in my dream. Car accident, I can't get out. I was pulling on my leg. And they started praying with me and praying for the car and praying for mommy and daddy and all sorts of stuff. And like the next day, a tree fell in the middle of the road and killed a truck driver, and like a branch pierced his chest through the windshield and killed him immediately. And his car swerved and hit our van, which had my mom, me, my great grandmother, who was 92, in the front seat, my little brother and my older brother in the back. And I had been sitting sideways with my leg between the seat and the side of the van, and he slammed into the side that I was on. So it broke my leg immediately, and it pinched my leg between the side of the van and the seat. And he rolled our car into the field. And I guess like I sat there for 20 minutes with the dead guy like leaning on the windshield about 2 feet from my face. And so
Jesus.
like a fire
I didn't know that part.
Yeah,
Alan.
so a fireman had to like stand between the driver and me so that I wouldn't see it. So when they arrived, they did that, and they had to use the jaws of life to get me out. And my great grandmother, she's this German woman, Olga, she kept telling the story how she pulled the car apart to get me out. Like that was her, that was her like memory of the situation, because she loved me so much. But yeah, they used the jaws of life to get me out, and so all of that like happened, and my parents were kind of freaked. Like they just prayed with me over this dream I had of being in a car accident and being stuck, and then it happened, you know?
And
so like
and touching and talking about your leg, right?
Oh yeah, exactly. And so that's only one instance, and there has been others that I don't talk about because I've been personally scarred by people who talk about stuff like this and the sensationalism of it, and like I think it's unhealthy. And so I don't know what to do. I call myself a cynical mystic because that's how I feel. Like I love science, I love philosophy. I have this like knee-jerk reaction to anyone talking about prophecy being future or having dreams about the future, but I myself experience it. So I don't know what to do with it.
Well, maybe it's just the terminology. Like, I mean, that is I can't imagine going through that, but should we have a different word for that kind of experience that's not prophecy?
Like a premonition or something like that. Right?
Well, I don't think premonition reflects how you would interpret that situation where it's saturated with the presence of God. So what?
Right.
I feel like maybe we're just missing a term to really.
I'm going to offer that that's actually prophecy, like anticipating the future, and the social justice, like calling out injustice stuff, is something else that we've been talking about this whole time.
They're different roles, right?
Well, okay, so this Alan, to me, like I've met a few people in my life who've had these experiences, and I want to credit that as like, I believe you. I believe that happened, right. And I believe that it's possible for people to anticipate the future. And so I don't know how it works. Yeah, is it coincidence or is it?
So that's the question. Coincidence doesn't necessarily imply causation or correlation, right? Like it
doesn't.
And so for me, it's a routine thing. This has happened more than once, and it is very connected to my spirituality. And so like, I still think it's very embodied. I think it has a lot to do with, chemicals in your brain and all sorts of things going on. So it's not this, to me, it's both.
The chemicals in your brain can't tell you what the future is going to happen. No,
you're right. But to wake up and say this is going to happen in the future is wrong. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like
no, it's either total coincidence, or it's like you have some sort of spiritual gift that other people don't have. Let's just presume for a second that it's the second thing, and presume that it's possible for people to know the future. So then what do we do with that? Do we go around chasing that kind of gifting? Do we go around chasing that knowledge?
So in my personal experience, not speaking from theology or the Bible, no. Like that's wrong. To pursue ecstatic experiences for the sake of ecstatic experience, to me is completely against the whole reason that stuff exists in the first place.
All right. Before we get too far off the trail, I think that I really disagree with what Mona said earlier, as far as maybe like this idea of like premonition, which again is a rough word, and I don't think fully encapsulates should be prophecy, and then justice is something else. We have a rich prophetic like heritage. I don't think you can just like arbitrarily switch them and say, well, this should be prophecy and this, like that idea of what, Alan, you've experienced and other people have experienced. I don't think we can call that prophecy.
It is in the New Testament.
It's like divination or something.
Yeah,
it's something else.
Paul in the New Testament encounters New Testament prophets. They call them prophets who like have dreams of, hey, you're going to go to Jerusalem. I think it's Gaius at one point takes off his belt and says, hey, if you go to Jerusalem, you're going to be tied up. Right. And so he goes to Jerusalem, and actually his prophecy is a little bit off. He says these people are going to kill him, but, are going to come to the prison to kill him. But it's someone else. It's the Jews, not the Gentiles.
Yes, but the context is not. And again, I don't know how to put this because you put the example out there. So anything I say, I'm not diminishing what you experienced, Alan. Please, I want you to understand that.
I understand.
But that's not the equivalent of a family driving down the road in their car and having this isolated experience that affects them. This is a record of the early church and how all of it was in tension with like, this is the future of the world and we are moving towards creating disciples of all nations. So it's still within that. It's not about, like we've talked about before throughout this conversation, it's not about the specifics about what the Bible talks about, but it's about the context in which these things are happening, and it's movement towards a more ideal version of justice in the world that we live in. And I don't think that we can take those personal experiences and call those prophecy. I think that's where we've made the biggest mistake, and why we're even having this conversation is because too many people have done that.
So what I hear you saying is, especially the book of Acts, people who function as prophets, as in like interpreting dreams and talking about the future, that is not the thing to kind of bring into our own context. It's the whole the message on the whole. And for people, that doesn't actually happen. You don't have people who have these ecstatic experiences.
That's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that I'm not saying that those things are. I personally, I have a hard time believing it, but I'm not at the point where I would say that's impossible. I'm not fundamental. I'm not fundamental about that. but I would say that if those things are real, which I still believe, a part of me does believe. Like if I'm honest, a part of me does believe like there's unexplained things. That's fine, but that doesn't mean, like, I feel like there needs to be a better word for it, and that it's been miscast as prophecy. Not that they don't exist, but it's been miscast.
Or maybe it's just a type of prophecy. But right. I'm trying to point to the fact that like the traditional religious understanding of prophecy is the premonition type of prophecy.
No, I don't think that's the traditional one. I think that's what it's
that's
come
how the Bible
to be.
is written, and that's what people have traditionally believed, is what I'm trying to say.
Or to know things by special revelation. A prophet is somebody who like gets this truth that they didn't know before, right, given to them. And so if you go back even before the New Testament, right, you look at the Greek, the oracle at Delphi was a young woman who would be in a cave, and the vapors would rise up from the cave and enter her body from below while she stood, sat on a stool. And then she would speak like kind of like a fortune teller, but also like, oh, hey, this is actually what's happening. Like speak the reality to the situation. So there's two different roles there. And so the whole like, hey, this is what's actually happening is how I feel how I look at the prophetic tradition. When Isaiah stands up to Hezekiah and he says, it's actually wrong that you are building this wall at the expense of these people's houses, he is speaking to the reality of the situation. When MLK stands up and says, these laws are wrong, right? He's speaking to the reality of the situation.
But what makes those specifically religious prophecy and not just somebody with an opinion who happens to be really right?
Right.
Like,
and I think that's the job of the community. And I think that takes I guess the word would be discernment or something, but it takes a discerning and critical mind and ear to be able to hear that, right?
So maybe we can call one social prophecy and one mystical prophecy, but they intersect like a whole bunch.
I don't know.
Because can you have prophecy that's disembodied, that's just only spiritualized and has no material anything?
I think not.
But
that's why
I think that goes against the very definition of prophecy.
But there's a lot of mystical. It goes against your definition. There's a lot of mystical traditions where people are talking about in a prophetic kind of vein of spiritual and cosmic realities that are very Mystical is the only word I can think,
Who's to say the future of the whole planet is different than the future of one little kid, right? Who's to say the future of I don't divide that stuff up nice and neatly. I mean, like,
well, there's the micro and the macro. I mean, yeah, the future of one kid is different than the planet.
Sure.
Absolutely.
If that was actually true, right? And that happened, and this is something, and for me it is. I believe God cares about. But Jeff, you're talking about
I don't want to admit. I'm not saying that
telling being two different things, right?
Yeah, and I'm not saying that. I don't want that to come across. I'm not saying that didn't happen. I'm just saying that
it's a different thing.
There could be an explanation for why it happened. That's all I'm saying.
Right.
But why do you want it to be outside the umbrella, Jeff?
Because of the misuse of how the word, the prophetic and prophet have been used, that it lumps it in with something that is, I think, very different. And I think
so people steal money. Does that mean money's like, you can only call money like cash and not other kinds of money? Like it doesn't, just because something's misused doesn't mean that you have to completely reframe all your categories.
Although you're saying there is a way to use a progressive view of the prophetic tradition would separate those things out, right? It would say there's this social critique that is different than predicting the future. Right, Jeff? Is that what you're saying?
I don't know. I don't know how to articulate fully what I'm trying to say. And I'm sure that most of my reaction to this particular subject is my upbringing and how the word prophet and prophecy came to be the chasing after charismatic spiritual experiences, and it had nothing to do with the real lives of people that were around who we were. In fact, the word prophetic in these moments were doing more to oppress people and create a system to push people out than doing anything else, which to me was the opposite of when I read the prophets. And when all the stuff that I read about the heart of the people who were the prophets, like Isaiah and all that. And I think that there's something big and at stake when we talk about prophecy. And I feel like that it has to have its own category always, just as the prophet themselves had to be in their own category and separate from the systems in general. So I think it's because I believe so strongly in my definition of prophecy that I just don't think it should share the stage with any other name.
No, I understand where you're coming
agree,
from in that.
right.
I hear that. And I share those frustrations and deep reaction also, for sure. Because I've seen it horribly abused. I've seen that kind of stuff horribly abused.
Like traveling prophets coming to your church and basically being fortune tellers and stuff, right?
Or shaming people publicly, like, hey, you there in the back, you have a pornography addiction and you need to get right with God.
Wait,
like that
seriously
kind of stuff.
Happened?
Oh yeah, all the time.
All the time.
All the time.
What the heck?
People were called out in front of groups all the time. Like half of my adolescence was scared to death that someone was going to call me out for masturbating the night before.
Oh my gosh.
Exactly. So prophecy was very much
That's terrible.
A moral arbiter, and an enforcer of cultural rules or social rules in the community, as much as probably more than future telling and cosmic sort of worldwide stuff. It was a lot of you need to get right with God and you're going to have a great future and a great career, or God's got an anointing on you. You should be preaching more or praying more, or it was very much a personal uplift correcting thing.
Where
my
were
experience.
The people in your church that was like, hey, this whole thing we're doing is wrong? Was there a space?
They went to another church.
Yeah, they're.
All right. Well, I think we're running to the end of our time for this conversation. So, any final thoughts?
Prophecy freaks me out, but it's also really helpful to understand how it works and to know about it. So, look up resources that are not popular resources that you would find in a Bible bookstore. Actually go look at some intellectual academic resources about the history of prophecy, like Alan was saying, so you can find a posture for how to interact with this stuff. And then there are wonderful contemporary resources for prophetic people and prophetic imaginers for you to tap into, like the civil rights movement and a lot of religious people doing prophetic work. That book Alan mentioned is an awesome place to start. It's a kind of an introduction to liberation theology, which is the idea that God has come to free the captives, not just in heaven, but also on earth. And so there's a social justice component to the gospel. That book is called The Prophetic Imagination by Walter Brueggemann. It's very good. I recommend.
And then I would throw in there with resources, and this will be my final word, is The Prophets by Abraham Heschel, and then The Message of the Prophets by Von Rad are also really good. And for all the resources we list, of course, we'll put them in the show notes at irenicast.com/83.
And Heschel was a Jewish scholar, by the way. So you'll get a different
that
perspective.
book is amazing, wonderful,
Yeah.
beautiful.
My final thought is that the main difference is what is actionable between different interpretations of how prophecy look. Actionable in the sense that, you have a dream and you have to hold it with a certain grain of salt. And instead of chasing the experiences that are ecstatic or whatever, trying to define prophecy in that way, we get way more bang for our buck, and we can actually take actions on looking at the way the prophetic tradition has been established in the past for that posture, and then getting to know our present context and what the Spirit wants for our present context. And what the Spirit of God wants is justice, not injustice. I think for me, I want to spend my time on that, not chasing these little ecstatic experiences that may mean a lot, but are not necessarily actionable for anybody else that might be listening to your story. So I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Let us know what you think if you have anything to add to this conversation, and you can do that at irenicast.com/83. That's irenicast.com/83. And for questions, comments, concerns, and suggestions for the show in general, you can always contact us at irenicast.com/feedback. On the other side of the music, we're going to be bringing back a segment called Title Me This. So Title Me This is the reverse of our other segment that we do, Judging a Book by Its Cover. So for Judging a Book by Its Cover, we read the title and come up with a synopsis. Here, we're going to read the synopsis, and each of us have to come up with a title for the book. Last time we did this, we did Christian romance novels, and this time we are centering it around.
It was so much fun.
It was fun.
Oh my gosh.
It was great. And then this one in particular is on Christian sci-fi novels. So
yeah.
So how this is going to work, each of us will read a scenario of the book, and then the other two hosts have to pick a title for it. And it kind of goes to the apples thing. So the host can pick whether they got it right or whether they just think it was a funny title.
Can I go first?
Sure.
Sure. Al.
Sweet. I shouldn't even ask permission. This is my show too.
I predict that you shall go first.
For my book, the synopsis goes: this thought-provoking and controversial story cuts between a violent and bloody present world in which millions of animals are slaughtered daily to a future America where all meat has been removed from the food chain. The unlikely hero goes against the status quo with unyielding determination to set an example of the power of kindness for the benefit of his family and friends.
How did you manage to find one that...
It's both prophetic and vegetarian and amazing.
Oh my God. You are such a hippie.
Hey, I found this on accident, all right?
All I can think is of our animal puns for titles, such as "Not in my bark yard."
Oh my goodness. I'm going with blood sausage.
Ooh.
I'm going
Very
with
nice.
motivation for change.
Oh my gosh.
The title of this book is God Does Not Eat Meat.
Okay. Well, there
Are you
you
serious?
go.
I know.
You can't be any more
Did
straightforward
you
than that.
accidentally find that when you were looking for more vegan propaganda?
No.
Did you actually order it? And
I
read
went
it?
to Barnes and Noble and I clicked Christian and sci-fi, and this was like in the 4th page, and I just had to. It's just funny. God does not eat meat. You know?
And these titles, I think we talked about this last time, but this is like very literal. Like it's just.
I know. Last time it was like, oh, there's this amazing synopsis, and it's like the worst, most banal,
Just
and
a descriptive
ever.
sentence.
It is. Yeah. The girl who left the castle or something. Anyway, so I'm going to go with motivation for change, just because
Yes!
it took
Because
it
you
took
like
creativity.
corny ass jokes, and that's why you went with it.
I do like blood sausage, but it made me uncomfortable when you said it, so I'm going with the other one.
Okay.
Oh my God.
Mona,
Okay,
do you
wanna
have
go
one?
first? Okay, yeah. All right. This book, this write-up is a real gem. I found like 8 typos. So it starts out saying, there's a byline saying, this is an excellent book for both religious and non-religious people, ! So
Nice.
yeah, I'm
It
pretty sure
rolls
the
both
author
ways.
wrote this. Yeah. Okay. While Viola X Mega, the evil robot master of the Dynamite X Empire, continues to reeve havoc in the city of Metro Mantis under the authority of the Dark Lord Venomous. Something tells Jonah Shields, the father of Luminate X, that it's time to finish the experiment and activate Luminate X2. This robot was specifically designed for a purpose to protect the Earth from the DX Obliterator, a weapon created using the powers from most of the Dunamis crystals. The clear crystal gets implanted into the Lumina X2, giving the robot more powers so it can fight against the evil Viola X Mega and the rest of the Empire try to bring peace. So enjoy the continuation of this action-packed adventure as you see what happens when the clear Dunamis crystal touches the dark Dunamis crystal. You'll be shocked! 3 exclamation points.
It's not nice to make fun of kids, because whoever wrote that has to be in like maybe junior high max.
It's free on Kindle. You can go check it out.
I'm gonna go look it up.
Yeah.
I feel like I just got a how-to manual of how all the robots work. That's
You'll
nice.
be shocked. Dun dun dun. Yeah. I mean, I appreciate the enthusiasm though. Like this person was like really freaking excited.
I like it.
About their story. Yeah.
I think it's called Luminati. Not Illuminati, but Luminati.
Okay.
Because of the luminous crystals.
Okay.
Touching crystal tips.
No. Why?
That part made me
Jeff,
laugh.
you're
too.
just being awkward tonight.
That part made me laugh.
I thought that was the point of this whole segment.
Okay, the actual title of this book is The Miracle Robot.
Nice.
Yeah, The Miracle Robot.
That's
fun.
That's strangely appropriate for our episode.
For your interpretation of the episode.
Because people are robots. They're just organic robots.
Jeff, are you going to forgive me for that?
Organs and stuff.
I'll think about it.
Who won? Whose title?
I'm going to go with Jeff because it was awkward and that I appreciate awkward humor.
There you go.
Yeah.
There we go.
So Jeff did not get the point for you, but he got the point for me for making me uncomfortable.
Okay.
Awesome.
It's a real short description. It's like a sci-fi romance novel. So here it is. He's a volatile, genetically engineered slave longing for peace. She is a spoiled princess who wants to reclaim the throne and save the world. He must help her. That's it.
That's it?
That's it. Zelda.
Pretty much it.
No.
That's the basic plot of Zelda right there.
Ever knock Zelda in my presence again. I'm going to go with Slave of My Heart.
Nothing to lose but your pains.
What?
But your what?
I don't know.
You could have at least said chains, not pains.
Yeah, it's a pun on the word chains. Never mind. Because he lives in an excruciating existence, right? Isn't that what
get
it is?
it.
No. Okay. I just can't stop thinking of Zelda. I can't. The title should just be Zelda.
All right. Well, but I know it's hard to pick which one to go with. So I'll go with yours, Mona, because it was less weird.
It's less weird.
The book is called The Dragon Warrior and the Princess.
Nice.
That's so
Extremely
not original.
literal. Right.
No.
That's what we talked about.
Apparently the fact that he's genetically engineered makes him look like a dragon, which is the only reason I can think Dragon Warrior is in there. But I don't understand.
Awesome.
Like I've read a couple.
I was thinking like steroids and stuff. Not.
All right, well, I think that'll do it for us this week. If you enjoy what you hear and you want to support Irenicast, you can go to irenicast.com/support for all the ways in which you can do that. So for this week, I'm Jeff.
I'm Mona.
And I'm Alan.
Thanks for joining the conversation.